Okay, good afternoon, good morning, everyone. So this is Roger here. I haven't seen you in a couple of weeks, so it's important that I provide a little bit of revision for weeks 1 to 6. I don't want you to treat this as explicitly as exam preparation. What I want to do is go over the important learning outcomes that you need to know. It's a good place to start when revising for your exam. There's no excuse for not looking up the textbook and the readings as well. So I'm going to go through slides for a while and talk about the important topics, but what I also want to talk about a little bit about is question and revision technique, and talk about the course outline, what the key topics we covered, and then if you have any questions arising from this, to post them on Moodle, so that everybody gets the advantage of the questions you've asked. So something that's really important when you're answering questions is that answering questions isn't about telling us what you think we want to hear. It's about demonstrating that you're capable of thinking, analysing and understanding a problem. So it's not just about regurgitating whatever in the notes, and that's why it's so important that you read around the course, read the textbook, read the extra notes, so that you can provide examples that show you understand what you're thinking, that you can provide the advantages and disadvantages of a problem, and that you can actually operationalise the theory for the question that's been asked. So talking about something like the value chain or portfolio forces and just talking about it on its own isn't really any value. But if you can apply that to an organisation or an industry, then that's a really useful skill. Okay, so one of the challenges of an exam is to bring together information, to review it, and to critically appraise. So that's looking at things holistically. So if there's information about privacy concerns or security threats or whatever, don't think of it explicitly in terms of the chapter on privacy or security. Think about how networks, how social factors, how culture, how different things can come in and influence it, and to bring it together. Be prepared to talk about the positives of a problem, but also if you can think of disadvantages. You don't have to agree with everything that the lecturer or the textbook has said. You have a right to your own opinion, but only if it's grounded in some kind of factual basis or example. And if you can contradict a theory and provide evidence to support it, that's a really interesting thing and an example of critical thinking, and it's likely to be rewarded in an exam. Okay, so I picked these 3 different sports because they're the ones in which technique is really important. A good skier or a good swimmer makes it look easy. A good golfer always hits the ball properly. Answering a question requires technique as well, so it's important that you think a little bit about how you answer questions. So golden rule. First golden rule is always answer the question on the paper. Don't answer the question you hoped would come up, answer the question that came up. It's really frustrating if somebody answers the wrong question. They provide this beautiful answer, but it's not actually to the one that's on the question. So the assumption that the examiner sometimes makes is that they just learned it off and they don't really realise that they haven't even tried to answer the question. Remember that this is an information technology information systems module, so while theories from other modules are interesting and they can often illuminate a problem, you should really focus on how IT and IS affect the problem in question. So examples, reference to articles, diagrams will be really good at showing you understand the concepts. So reproducing theory is a pass mark. Showing that you understand it and whatever gets you into honours, and then showing that critical understanding of the areas around it and having read around the course, additional reading and an ability to relate high level points, you're into first class honours territory. So use your time well. Read your paper, decide what questions you're going to do, and get out of a question when time is up. There's a law of diminishing returns. Never panic. There's no gain in panicking. Stay calm, use your time well. If you've spent too much time on a question, you haven't finished it, leave it, move on to the next one. You can come back if you have time, but the first few marks in every question are the easy ones. So keep calm and carry on. So a really good question needs a really good answer needs a degree of professionalism. So it needs to be well presented, well laid out, but it also needs to have a logical flow to it, that it's easy to understand. best answers will have a degree of uniqueness and originality. So they'll pick good examples. They'll spot things that other people mightn't have spotted. They'll bring in evidence of other reading, and that mightn't necessarily been directed to by the lecturer. They'll be able to integrate concepts. So they'll be able to understand how ethics ethics may have ethics and whistleblowing and privacy might all come together, in a single problem. They'll provide a conclusion that's justified by the analysis. So sometimes what will happen is people will, write an answer based on what they can remember, but have a vague feeling that it's not maybe what the examiner wants, and will write a conclusion that doesn't actually make any sense based on what goes before. So your conclusion is fine, providing it's based on what's come before. And do provide a conclusion. Provide a line or two that summarises what you're trying to say. Check out the materials on Moodle. We put them up there for a reason. The lecture materials, links to additional reading, journal articles. They're really useful. So what to remember is, if you want first class, that is actually exceptional. People have a kind of this idea that, sometimes based on schoolwork or American grades, that 70 isn't a good mark. 70 is an exceptional mark. 60, intellectually competent. 50, kind of satisfactory. 40 is barely acceptable, and we don't need to talk about the others. So first thing is read the question. If it says define, then you present a definition and move on. If it's describe and explain, generally describe or explain means the same thing. Explain in full what you know about something, describe its characteristics. Discuss is often to talk about, so you go a little bit deeper, so you might be trying to prove something, or present the pluses and minuses. What are the differences between something? What are the advantages and disadvantages? And then critically is another level of depth. So it's this idea that you have a balanced answer. So you point out the mistakes and weaknesses on both sides. And rather than actually, trying to ram home an argument to say that, technology is good and privacy is silly, you focus on both aspects, and go into them in detail. And then you can come down in your conclusion, you can argue that you feel one is better from a particular perspective or whatever. But it requires that level of depth. So something to remember is that paper is free in exams. Examiners can have huge numbers of scripts to correct, so leave plenty of space between answers. Make it easy for the person. Leave that blank space so that the examiner knows you're on a separate question, but it also gives you the opportunity, if you've come back, if you run out of time and then you come back and to finish a question later, that the space is there, so you're not saying please turn over to page 9 or answer in next booklet or rest of answer. That it just makes it hard to follow. Never use two answers on the same page. It can be a little bit confusing. So you've 90 minutes for the exam to do 5 questions, to do three out of 5 questions. Use it. Honestly, you've spent 2 years in college so far. Is leaving 30 minutes early that important? You never know. That extra little piece of inspiration might come to you in the last 5 minutes that is the difference between pass and fail, or 2-1 or 2-2. It might salvage your summer. So the exam itself consists of 5 questions on total, but you have to answer 3 of them. All questions have equal marks. So each question is divided into 2 parts. So there'll be a certain amount of description and discussion. So you really need to show that you know the theory and how to apply it. So basically, we've split it in half. There's 5 questions, so either 2 or 3 questions will come from weeks 1 to 6, and 2 or 3 questions will come from weeks 7 to 12. We're not prepared to say which is which. So you need to study both aspects of the course. So the questions will have 2 parts, but it's important to remember each part may not have an equal number of marks. So check the marks for each part and apportion your time appropriately. There is just no point leaving early. You'll be on your own. All your friends will be inside finishing the exam. Choose your questions carefully. It's worth spending a little bit of time thinking them through. Look at both parts of the question. Sometimes what people will see is they'll see the first part of the question and they'll jump at it and they'll say, yeah, I'm going to do that. That's not really the best way to go. So planning your time is really super important. So if you're going to spend a couple of minutes reading the paper, that eliminates the time for each question. So you you might say, I'm going to spend 10 minutes reading the paper and choosing which questions. So that leaves 80 for the 3 questions. So if you're going to say, so that's say 26 minutes each, you're going to spend 2 to 3 minutes planning an answer. So you're down to 23 minutes of actual writing. So then you might actually break it down and say, well, I'm going to spend 13 minutes on the first part and 10 minutes on the second part. And the reason why this is really important is this idea of time wasting. There comes a point where, let me see if the mouse comes up. There comes a point where here, the actual advantage of spending more time. You've presented your definition, you've given the theory, you've described an example that applies to it, you've provided some advantages and disadvantages, and now you think, God, I really know this one really well, I'm going to give them, an extra 5 things. And the reality is you've probably picked up most of the marks already, so move on and come back later if you still have time. So it's really important is to identify the question requirements. What's it actually asking for? So break it down, underline the keywords. Then in your answer plan, think, what are the important theories? Am I going to use Porter's 5 forces? Am I going to use the value chain? And what am I actually going to use? Throw at this question to try and answer it. What have I read that will actually help me, that will show that I understand it? Is there a paper? Is there a journal article? Is there a newspaper article? Is there a magazine article? Computer Wired? Is there something I've read in the newspaper, or a Facebook article even that was shared that is applicable to this? So sometimes you can use a mind map if you like, that lets you structure it around, and throw in some examples. In your answer plan, say, and pick organizations you're familiar with, that you know what they do. If you're into sport and you like a flutter, you might understand how the Paddy Power online app works. If you've been on a interrailing, you might understand how some of the rail companies' websites work. Ryanair website is another one. Companies you're familiar with, Amazon. Pick those and think how you can actually apply them to the problem, and always plan your time based on the marks. So everything you write between in your exam book can get marked, but only if it's to your advantage. If you write something that's wrong, it gets ignored. You don't lose marks in an exam, but that doesn't give you a right to write rubbish. Blather and waffle add no value. It has to be relevant to the question. If you just have no idea what a particular question is about, write down anything that you think is relevant, but then if you can't think of anything that's relevant, go off and spend your time on another question. So, something like this is from a different module, but an answer plan might look something like this. So we're going to present a definition, we talk about the characteristics of the problem, then we compare it and provide the characteristics of a different approach. We describe, what's better about it. We're going to do an example and a diagram, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the extra readings. And suddenly, and the idea is that looks very, linear, that it's a process, but we might integrate the different parts. We might start off with the example and integrate it in, so that when we're talking about the advantages or disadvantages, we can really drive home the point that we understand what we're talking about. So this is really, really important to remember, is that lecture notes are not published material. They are not the sole resource to be used for revision purposes or for preparing for continuous assessments. They are a summary of the important theories and an entry point into the books. They're just a part of the lecture and the work you need to do. They're not a substitute for note-taking, and it is, I would say, strongly encouraged. You must read outside the essential and recommended material if you want to do well. So that's the textbook to remember. That's available through the website. So you really want to have that open when you're doing your study. So I'm going to start talking about the summary now. So don't bother looking for tips. I had to set 2 exams, one for the summer, one for the autumn. I can't remember which is which, and I deliberately haven't looked, so that you won't actually accidentally read anything into what I've said. So in the next section, I'm going to cover, I'm going to start covering some of the topics we covered over the last in the first 6 weeks of the course. Thanks, and talk to you in a minute.